long ago now, actually between 50 and 60 years ago, I started working on what determines the growth rate of a national economy. Why do some grow faster than others, and others not grow at all? I'm thinking of modern economies, industrial economies. And I happened on what was a very surprising result to me and to everybody else, which is that the overwhelmingly important factor in the long-term growth of GDP, of real output, is technological change, not capital investment. And most of us, the tradition in economics was to trace growth back to growth in the labor input, growth in capital, and that was about it. And it turned out that logical methods could attach much less importance to capital investment than we had thought, and that the true factor that it was worth trying to improve, if you want to improve the growth of the economy, was invention and innovation. And I was able to work out the theory of that and verify it. I had data from the US, if I remember correctly, ranging from about 1907 to 1957. And that turned out to be the proper explanation. And so that made a splash, and I continued to work at it. And I have to say, I taught at MIT, and I taught marvelous young people. And I suppose really the most important thing that brought me here was the fact that I have had all those good students. What I like to think is that I grew up in the 1930s, and I served 3 years during the Second World War. And it was clear to people of my age that society was sort of broken. We'd lived through the Depression, and then the whole world broke down into warfare. And I thought it was important to learn what was wrong and how to fix it. And I liked economics because it was very logical, and there was very little impressionism in it. It was mostly this follows from that, and then this following from the other thing, and so on. And so once I was exposed to it, I liked it and I stuck it. Now the nitty-gritty of the story is that I landed in the US in August of 1945 and married my girl. And we were going on a honeymoon. I was still in the service. I hadn't been discharged yet. And we were in a hotel in Cambridge, Mass, on our way to Cape Cod for a little bit of a honeymoon. Then I go back to the service. And we were listening to the radio, and the radio announced the point system for getting out of the Army. You got 1 point for this, 5 points for that. And I kept adding and adding in my head. And finally I turned to my wife and I said, I'm out. And okay, you're out. So then we have to decide what I'm going to do. I finished my sophomore year in college. After that, I had volunteered to the Army and joined the Army. So I said, well, I better go back and tell them that I'm going to come back. It was August. I'm going to be back in September to finish my junior year. What am I going to major in? I hadn't really done much my freshman and sophomore years. So I said to my wife of 3 days, you were an economics major, weren't you? And she said, yes. I said, was it interesting? She said, yes. I said, oh, well, I'll give it a shot. So I went and registered as an economics major. And so that's the nitty-gritty. The fancy story is maybe why I really liked it, why I enjoyed it when I started doing it. It's a very interesting time because there is a belief, and it's not a foolish belief, that this motor from the side of technological innovation is wearing down, not necessarily because of anything we have done or done wrong, but because the big prizes that nature will give us if we learn how to take it have already been got. that we've learned about the internal combustion engine, we've learned about electrification, we've learned about how to build cities, and now we're down to the internet. And there are people, I'm not necessarily convinced by this at all, but there are people who say the potential for economic growth involved in the internet cannot compare with those great inventions of the 19th century and the earlier 20th century. And I'm not, as I say, I'm not convinced by that. Although I've tried an experiment that a former student of mine has suggested, and asked people, if you had to give up email or the flush toilet, which would you give up? And most people would give up email rather than the flush toilet. But so it's very interesting and important to work out, if we can, in the face of uncertainty and ignorance, what are the prospects that future technology offer us? Not in terms of gee whiz, because there can be an infinite amount of gee whiz, but how can you convert that into gross domestic product? And that strikes me as awfully interesting and exciting. It's one thing to get some kind of honor among economists. I know them all, they know me, and while, you know, I can't say I didn't get a lot of pleasure out of winning a Nobel Prize and all that. What's particularly special about this is who your company is. As of yesterday, if I asked you to use the words Solow and Streep in the same sentence, you'd be stuck. Now you wouldn't be stuck. And you know, to share in something, you know, this grand with people, important people you value from all over is really quite different from just the standard professional kind of thing. Here I am on that stage. I'm sitting between Stevie Wonder and Charlie Sifford, who I learned was a pioneer black golfer. And I didn't know about, I play golf myself. Turns out that my niece works for the U.S. Golf Association, and she was at a dinner last night for Charlie Sifford, and she told me all about him. Well, now that counts for something. If I had one economist I know on my left and another economist I know on my right, that could be fun too, but it's not nearly the same as this.